Every 2 weeks, the money disappears from your paycheck, line by line. Federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare. It all adds up quietly, automatically. Most people don't notice. They see the direct deposit hit, but not how much was taken. And even if they do, they shrug. It's taxes. What can you do? But what if you didn't shrug? What if you stopped and asked, where is that money actually going? You pay into the system your whole life, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, over a lifetime. But when you ask for help, when you need a hospital, a good school, a safe road, suddenly there's never enough funding. You pay for wars you didn't vote for, tax breaks you'll never qualify for, and interest on debt from decisions made before you were born. Meanwhile, billion-dollar corporations find loopholes and still collect government subsidies. You get audited for a typo. They get bonuses for capital losses. So where does your tax money really go? Who decides how it's spent? And why do working people keep paying more while getting less? This isn't about politics. It's about the price of living in a system you don't control, but pay for anyway. In this episode of EconoFocus, we follow the money, from your paycheck to the federal ledger, to see exactly where your tax dollars end up and who actually benefits. Let's zoom out. In 2024, the U.S. government collected around $4.9 trillion in taxes. That's more money than any corporation on Earth will ever see. And you helped fund it. But where does that $4.9 trillion come from? Roughly 53% came from individual income taxes. That's people like you, workers, freelancers, teachers, nurses, truck drivers. Another 30% came from payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare, also pulled straight from your check. Corporate income taxes, just 9%. So here's the first reality check. The vast majority of government revenue doesn't come from billion-dollar corporations. It comes from you. Now let's flip the question. How is it spent? Imagine you earn $100 and hand it to the federal government. Here's roughly how they divide it. $15 goes to Social Security, retirement, disability, survivor benefits. $15 goes to healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP. $13 goes to the military, bases, salaries, weapons, wars. $9 goes to interest on the national debt. Just the interest, not the principal. $5 goes to veterans benefits, $3 to education, $2 to infrastructure. And the remaining $38, that funds everything else: agriculture, housing, research, foreign aid, law enforcement, Congress itself. These are the official categories. They look clean on paper, but under each of these broad terms is a jungle of spending, some vital, some outdated, some flat out wasteful. For example, healthcare includes both life-saving Medicaid programs and questionable Medicare overpayments to private insurance companies. Defense includes the troops and the VA, but also massive contracts to private weapons manufacturers and overseas base upkeep. And everything else? That's where you find the real maze. Housing subsidies, tax credits, surveillance programs, emergency relief, and pork barrel projects no one wants to admit to. So yes, the big picture looks balanced. But when you look closer, it's not just what's being spent, it's who it's being spent on that matters. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the defense budget, where your tax dollars fund both national security and corporate profits. Let's talk about one of the most sacred and least questioned categories in the federal budget: defense. In 2024, the U.S. officially allocated around $820 billion to the Department of Defense. That's 13 cents of every federal dollar. Already massive. But that's just the start. Because when you add in veterans benefits, nuclear weapons under the Department of Energy intelligence agencies like the CIA and NSA Homeland Security, and interest on past military spending, you're looking at well over $1.2 trillion a year in military-related costs. That's more than the U.S. spends on Medicare, education, infrastructure, and housing combined. And here's what most people don't realize. only a fraction of that money goes directly to soldiers or veterans. In fact, nearly half of the Pentagon's annual budget goes to private defense contractors. Companies like Lockheed Martin, builder of the F-35 fighter jet, which cost over $400 billion and still has technical flaws. Raytheon, a missile systems manufacturer whose former executive became Secretary of Defense. Boeing, which supplies military aircraft, drones, and satellites. These aren't small players. They're multi-billion-dollar corporations with deep ties to Congress. And every year they lobby for more contracts, more funding, more war readiness, regardless of whether a war is happening or not. And when the wars end, the money doesn't come back. The military budget keeps growing because it's no longer just about defending the country. It's about sustaining a permanent war economy. Meanwhile, back home, bridges collapse, schools crumble, hospitals close in rural towns, veterans struggle to get basic care. We're told there's no money for those things, but there's always enough for new weapon systems, new bases, new conflicts. So ask yourself, if defense is about protecting American lives, why are so many Americans still unprotected? Not from foreign enemies, but from poverty, illness, and neglect. And when you realize that your tax dollars are making defense contractors rich, while your neighbor can't afford insulin, you start to see the problem isn't just how much we spend, it's who's benefiting from it. And the cost doesn't end there, because even after the checks are cut, the bases are built, and the weapons are launched, there's still a bill we haven't talked about yet, the interest. Every month you pay your bills, rent, groceries, utilities. And if you're like most people, at least one payment toward debt. Now imagine this. You're doing that not just for yourself, but for the entire country. Because a huge portion of your tax dollars, about 9 cents on every federal dollar, goes to paying interest. Not on your mortgage, not on student loans, but on government debt. In 2024 alone, the U.S. spent over $659 billion just on interest payments. That's money that doesn't build roads, doesn't fund education, doesn't reduce poverty or create jobs. It's not even chipping away at the national debt. It's just covering the minimum payment. Think of it this way. If you paid $659 billion toward your credit card this year, and the balance didn't shrink, you'd call that a trap, and you'd be right. Now zoom out. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion, and much of it was racked up by previous generations. Wars, tax cuts, recessions, bailouts. The government borrows money by issuing treasury bonds. These are bought by foreign governments, hedge funds, banks, even other parts of the government. And while those investors collect guaranteed interest, you, the taxpayer, foot the bill. It's like your paycheck is being used to pay rent on a house you'll never live in. And here's the catch. As interest rates rise, so does the cost of servicing that debt, which means in just a few years, interest alone could become the largest line item in the entire federal budget, surpassing defense, healthcare, and Social Security. So what happens then? Cuts to the programs you rely on, to the services that matter, all to make sure creditors get paid on time, in full. It's not personal finance, it's national obedience to a system that punishes the future to pay for the past. And while you help pay off this invisible bill, billions more are being handed out, often quietly and often to those who need it least. Let's talk about corporate subsidies, tax breaks, and the quiet drain of wealth that most Americans never see coming. If you're like most taxpayers, you probably think government spending goes toward the basics. Things like roads, schools, healthcare, and defense. But a surprising portion of your tax dollars? They go to corporations, and not just in obvious ways. Yes, there are direct subsidies, government handouts to support entire industries, oil companies, big agriculture, aerospace and defense contractors. But what we don't often talk about are the backdoor benefits, the tax breaks, loopholes, and accounting tricks that quietly cost billions. Let's break it down. Oil and gas, despite making record profits, some in the tens of billions, fossil fuel companies still receive billions in tax incentives each year. Why? To encourage exploration and promote energy independence. But here's the twist. These subsidies were written decades ago, when the industry needed help getting started. Now, they're simply baked into the budget. You're helping fund companies that pollute the air and rake in profits while doing it. Big agriculture, massive farming conglomerates get crop insurance, disaster bailouts, and commodity price supports, while many independent family farms disappear. Your tax dollars support a food system dominated by just a few global players, and you still pay extra at the grocery store. The hidden loopholes. Some of the biggest giveaways don't even look like spending. They hide in the tax code. Corporations shift profits to low-tax countries. They deduct losses from one division to offset gains in another. Real estate moguls depreciate property even when it appreciates in value. And thanks to the carried interest loophole, hedge fund managers can classify income as capital gains, taxed at a lower rate than many middle-class workers. Meanwhile, Amazon, Apple, and other giants have had years where they paid close to nothing in federal income tax. Legally, how? Tax credits, accelerated depreciation, R&D deductions, and armies of accountants who know exactly how to twist the code. And it gets worse. Corporate bailouts. When things go wrong, when markets crash or companies fail, guess who steps in? You do. Whether it's the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 corporate rescue packages, or the quiet, ongoing subsidies to industries too big to fail, your tax dollars get funneled into corporations that made risky bets, then walked away with golden parachutes. So here's the hard truth. We don't just live in a capitalist economy. We live in a system where profits are private and losses are public. You take the risk, you pay the bill, they get the write-off. And after all of that, we're still told the money's tight, that there isn't enough to fix your town's roads, your child's school, or your neighbor's hospital. So let's ask the question that really matters. What do you actually get back? After everything you pay, after the deductions, the withholdings, the annual tax return, what do you actually get in return? You get roads, some of them cracked. You get schools, some of them underfunded. You get clean water, unless you live in Flint. You get Social Security, eventually if you live long enough. You get Medicare, if it still exists when you retire. And you get hope. Hope that the system you fund will be there for you when you need it most. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For many Americans, what they get doesn't match what they give. You can pay into Social Security your whole life and still live in poverty in retirement. You can pay taxes on your income, sales, fuel, and property, and still drive on pothole-ridden roads, send your kids to overcrowded schools, and wait 6 weeks for a basic medical appointment. You're told government is inefficient, but somehow it's never too inefficient to collect your money. just too inefficient to return it in ways that make your life better. Meanwhile, billion-dollar companies get tax breaks that help fund stock buybacks. Private jets write off expenses, and entire industries get refunded for losses they caused, while your town fundraises for new fire trucks. And then you're told, there's not enough in the budget. We need to make cuts. We all have to tighten our belts. But why is it always your belt? You do your part. You follow the rules. You pay your share, often more than your share. And yet when disaster strikes, when the rent spikes, the flood hits, or the economy turns, you're not rewarded for paying in. You're left to fend for yourself. So let's be honest. This isn't about whether we should pay taxes. It's about whether we're getting what we were promised. Because if the government is an investment of the people, by the people, for the people, then the return on that investment should look like care, protection, opportunity, not frustration, not scarcity, not silence. You've followed the money. Now the question is, what can we do about it? So, where does your tax money actually go? To defense contractors, to interest on old debt, to corporate subsidies and quiet loopholes, to systems that pay out more to power than to people? Some of it builds, some of it protects, but far too much of it maintains a status quo that doesn't serve you. And here's the part no one wants to admit. Every tax dollar is a value judgment. Every budget is a map of priorities. What we fund reflects what we value, and what we ignore reveals who we're willing to leave behind. You've been told taxes are your civic duty, and they are. But duty without accountability? That's not democracy. That's a transaction without consent. And if you feel like the system keeps taking without giving back, you're not imagining it. You're experiencing the difference between a government that manages money and one that serves people. But this doesn't have to be permanent. It's not fate, it's policy, and policy can be changed, but only if people know what to demand. So start here. Don't just file and forget. Ask questions, talk about where your money goes, read past the headlines and beyond the pie charts. Because if you don't know where your taxes are going, someone else is deciding for you. And it's probably not someone who lives paycheck to paycheck. Share this video, challenge your assumptions, push the conversation forward, and remember, you may not control the system yet, but your awareness is power, and power, when shared and sharpened, becomes change. This is EconoFocus, where we follow the money, ask the hard questions, and keep the spotlight exactly where it belongs. We'll see you in the next one.